Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on abstract writing for the 2024 SAAIR conference. My name's Ashton Mahiri. I'm one of the EXCO members of SAAIR, and I'll be taking you through the abstract writing process so that we're able to get some really nice, good quality abstracts coming in for the conference. So just a note, in terms of attribution for some of these slides, a lot of this work is taken from Professor Gustav Olsen, and they remain the intellectual property of Gustav Olsen. Gustav and myself ran a series of publication workshops in South Africa for the young water professionals in 2016. So a lot of the slides have been adapted from that. And I'll also share in the link as we actually produced a guideline on publishing for young water professionals. So some of you might ask why I feel I'm qualified to be talking about abstract writing. And if you had read the blurb on the authors in the advertisement, I've literally written the book on publishing. Not that I'm an expert on publishing, but I think I've got some good insight and good experience as to how we go about building capacity for publishing. The focus I'd had was with the young water professionals, which would be people under the age of 35 or been in the water sector for less than 5 years. But a lot of the lessons and that we applied and the learnings from that apply directly to SAAIR, where we're trying to build capacity for publishing and publishing within the field of institutional research. And in terms of my credentials over there, you can see I have published a lot. That's the Google Scholar one, which is always inflated because it includes reports as well as journal articles, but co-authored around 10 journal articles. And I will say I was quite lucky. I used to work at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and they very much took a collaborative approach when it came to publishing. I know universities, because of your funding formula with your research outputs, any subsidy you get has to be divided by the co-authors. So there's an incentive not to actually include co-authors in your journal articles. Whereas when I was at the CSIR, we didn't get those subsidies that universities get. So we very much took a collaborative approach to article writing. And learning by doing, and having lead authors who would be very much willing to share their expertise and how you would go about putting together a journal article. So a little bit in terms of the program, I'm going to be going through why we should be publishing. Then what happens when you start writing, and I'll be talking a bit around the skeleton outline, and then go into things that you'll need in terms of writing your abstract, such as your title, your keywords, what should be in an abstract. I'll take you through some of the evaluation criteria that we will be using for the abstracts, and these have remained fairly consistent year on year on year. And then I'll just say a little note about authors and using AI, since that seems to be quite a hot topic. And then we'll end off with around discussing some of the SAAIR conference themes and sub-themes. And Michael, the conference chair, will be presenting on that. So why publish? Publishing really still means the crucial quality test in terms of the peer review that takes place on the work. I think some of us with backgrounds in quality assurance realize that it is really the ultimate when it comes to the quality test of research. Being able to publish, for it to be peer reviewed and then published, is a sign that not necessarily that the research is right, but that there has been a quality process involved around it. And even when it comes to your abstracts, that goes through a double-blind process, peer review process, and that. So there is some sort of quality assurance when it comes to abstracts which are accepted to be presented at the conference. It's also a condition of open research, and being involved at SAAIR, which is around enabling open, successful learning for all. We very much promote open research, open education, open access. So you're opening up the research and you're allowing other people to see what you're doing, how you're going about it, which is very much in terms of what is needed, because there's a lovely quote that we stand on the shoulders of giants. By making our research open, and you giving it you're giving other people an opportunity to use your research and build on from it. So it's very much a concept in terms of how we further our research. And actually, for SAAIR in particular, to build up some scholarly approaches to how we go about doing institutional research. So that's a huge proponent as to why we should be publishing. Another one is that you'll get known. If you don't publish, you tend not to be known, especially in the academic space. You will also get to meet other researchers and practitioners, and you can start to compare some of your results. So again, not working in isolation, you start to become a community of practitioners around the work that you do, which is useful because again, through collaboration, we're able to achieve so much more. Importantly, you don't buy knowledge, you exchange it. So you're able to exchange what you know with other people. And that is how you would go about knowing more. You build up a network of colleagues. That's important. People would start to approach you through some of the articles that you've written in order to get some more insights. And that professional network that you build up is really important, especially if you want to start changing institutions and getting jobs elsewhere. And you can attend conferences. I know for universities, it becomes a prerequisite that you, in order to be able to attend a conference, you need to have a paper that's been accepted for presentations. And I would imagine that with the financial crunch that a lot of the universities are going through at the moment, that this is becoming more and more important as a means of justifying your attendance at conferences, is that you would need to be able to present at it. So if your research is not published in a journal or a well-known conference, it doesn't exist. And I think that's an important part to just take a moment and reflect on and consider. So your research needs to be out there. People need to be able to find it. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. And even in the increase with the generative AI at the moment, a lot of the research that it points to in its responses is the research which is publicly available. So that's another incentive to go about publishing your research, is that it then creates a record of it. And if it's not published, it typically doesn't exist, or it's very hard to find. And then for academics themselves, you're evaluated based on the impact factor and the number of papers that you have and the number of citations that you have. So especially if you're wanting to move into the academic space, your academic publications becomes a record of how good a researcher and an academic that you are. I do know, even when you're dealing with being in universities and working with people who are professors and doctors and deans, having that title of a doctor in front of your name gives a lot of credibility to what you say. And likewise, having a H-index and having published articles gives credibility to the research that you do and the conclusions that you're able to make. So those are just some of the reasons as to why we should go about publishing. But another thing to just keep in mind is that to successfully reach and influence your target audiences, this requires careful planning of both the writing and the publication process, so that your papers are not only read, but they understood and they found meaningful and influential by readers. So that is important to keep in mind. I think all of us within SAAIR, we know who our audience is. It's other practitioners in higher education institutions in the fields of institutional research, quality assurance, HEMIS, um, all of those. Learning analytics now, which is becoming increasingly a focus area. So we know who our audience is, but we want our work to be understood. We want our work to be used. And that's part of the rationale that we need in publishing, and something that we have to plan for, because it doesn't just happen by itself. Publishing a paper doesn't mean that your research is going to be used by other people. There are additional steps that are needed around communicating your research as well. So that's just a little bit of a background. If we have a look at the order of writing, I think this is quite important to keep in mind how one should go about writing. Typically in the beginning, you would start with your objective. You would do a first outline of your title, a first outline of your introduction, and what is your vision? The vision for your paper, and that's around who the audience is, what is it you're trying to achieve with the paper, and a possible conclusion already before you even do your data collection or your analysis. You might have an idea of what the results or the conclusion would be already upfront. So that's at the beginning. Then continuously, you'll be working on your materials, your methods, your results, your references. And this tends to take a lot of time as well in terms of planning for your work. And then when it's completed, you would write your abstract. You would upgrade your introduction again. You would upgrade the conclusion, which is the message of your research, and it should be logically derived from the results. And then you would do a final editing of your title. So you start with the introduction and the conclusion, and you finish with the introduction and the conclusion. You don't typically write in order, starting with your title, abstract, introduction, methods and materials, results, discussion, conclusion. It is an iterative process. And it's good to start with the introduction and the conclusion, and then structure your paper around that. And then you go back to your introduction and your conclusion, and you finish it off. This helps you maintain the focus that you need in a paper so that it doesn't start wandering and touching on topics that aren't relevant to your overall objective of the paper. Importantly, revise, revise, and revise. And when you think you're done, revise it again. You won't get it right first time round. It would take a lot of iterations involved. And this can become a lot of work and quite time consuming, but that is part of the publication process. You would need to revise, and hopefully with each iteration and revision that you do, it becomes better and better and better and more clearer. Important to know that it will never be perfect. And at some point you just have to accept it for what it is. But up until that point, a lot of revision will need to take place. So you are here, are you not, when it comes to your writing your abstract for the SAAIR conference? Your work is complete. I imagine not. A lot of us tend to start with the abstract when it comes to our work, because that's the first thing that's required by a conference. But really, in the correct order of writing, it should be the last thing that you do when your work is completed. So that is something to keep in mind. I'm going to try and touch through some of the elements of the whole paper writing process, because you would need all of those elements in order to be able to write your abstract. And I think, especially in terms of the evaluation that was done on the abstracts, I've evaluated a lot of abstracts for conferences. You can see that they're the first attempt, and they've been written before the person actually has an idea of what are the key outcomes or the key objectives of the work that they want to present. They kind of start with the introduction and they end with the conclusion. But really, when it comes to the paper writing process, it should be the last thing that you do after all of your research is done. So keeping in mind, now we're going to move on to quite a busy slide. I just want to try and highlight some of the key elements between a academic and a practitioner when it comes to the research that you do. The title kind of remains the same. The title sells the manuscript, and I'll be discussing the title a little bit more in later in the session, because it also gets people to attend your actual presentation. Only express one idea or subject in the title and ensure that those important words are placed first. Your abstract, as it should be, is a brief summary that outlines the study's objectives, the methodology or approach, the key findings, and the conclusions. So we'll be focusing a little bit on that today in terms of how you would go about putting that together. The introduction, in the introduction for both academics and practitioners, you would include the objective. What is the problem or the research question that you're trying to address? You would give it a concise background, focusing on the gap in knowledge and how your research addresses it. So that's important because that's what the purpose of a literature review is. Well, I don't think for institutional research, but for a lot of other conferences, we see people trying to do literature reviews from their PhD and their masters as a presentation topic. That is not a presentation topic in itself. You would find that rejected from most journals because it's not adding anything new. It's just providing the background to the work that you do. So if you have a literature review and you're a PhD or a master's student, that is not something that you would present as a topic for a conference or something that you would submit to a journal because you would be wasting the editor's time. Where you are able to do review papers is where you have 15, 20, 30 years of experience in the field, and you're able to do a review paper based on the available literature with the insight that you have in terms of your experience in the field. So if you are studying your master's and your PhD and you're having pressure from your supervisors to publish and get 3 publications out of it, the literature review should not be one. Okay. So again, in the introduction, you would also state your hypothesis, what is the suggested solution to the problem, and possibly start to contextualize your results. So what is the landscape looking like in terms of higher education in South Africa? So that's the purpose of the introduction. It's meant to introduce people into it, into your research. And most people, when they would go about reading a paper, they would read the title, read the abstract, read the conclusions, and then go back to the introduction. At least that's the way I read things. So the introduction is important, but again, it's providing context to your study. So materials and methods, and here it starts to separate between an academic versus a practitioner. Typically for the academic, you'd be focusing on your research design, your data collection methods, what statistical analysis have you used, and you do this so that it can be verified and replicated. That's the purpose of the materials and methods. So somebody can verify the steps that you've done and they're able to replicate it themselves. And if they replicate it, they should be able to produce the same results. In this, there's always a toss-up between brevity and completeness. So you don't want to go into too much detail, but you need to provide sufficient detail so that people are aware of the process and the approach that was used, and they should be able to replicate it. But when it comes to practitioners, typically at this point, you would be describing the process that you followed or the intervention that was done. And again, this is so it can be verified and replicated. Um, um, yeah. I'll respond to Ramanda in once I go through all of this. Okay. The results remain the same for everybody. And this is where you would present your experimental or your intervention results, which you would then discuss in the next session. Typically, you would only show the results that are relevant to your objectives and conclusions and that you intend to discuss. This is a fault that a lot of people make when it comes to surveys. They would want to put in all of the survey information and all of the results of the surveys, but you need to only put in the results that are applicable to your objectives of your paper and the ones that you plan on discussing. The discussion is what makes it scientific. Okay, so in a scientific paper, you don't just list your results, but you need to interpret them. That's where the scholarly approach, the academic comes in. It's around the interpretation of them. So really the data that you present in your results section should lead you and the reader via the discussion to the conclusions. You have to tell a story of the work. So presenting your results, discussing those results, and then making conclusions that are based on the discussions. Avoid putting in statements like saying that results will be presented at the conference, because that's just a red flag saying that you haven't done your research yet, and you might not be able to do your research by the time the conference happens. In the conclusions, this is where you would conclude your work so far. What are the lessons learned, any unanswered questions, and recommendations? In the conclusions, you don't start discussing things or introducing new ideas that you haven't mentioned previously in your paper. So there's a very logical structure to this for the reader to be able to follow your work. When it comes to references, academics, you have to have those references, and typically there are abundance of possible references when it comes to having to choose. For practitioners, the work benefits from having references, but it's usually hard to find suitable references because practitioners tend not to publish. And again, that's something that we're hoping to address through SAAIR, through our journals, and that is to create a repository for practitioners to be able to publish their research so that they're able to reference them and provide context of what was known before people do their work. Okay, so for me, those are the key differences. And the key differences between an academic and the practitioner is really around how you would write up your materials and methods. So, and the question in the chat was how I read an article. So if there's an article and I'm reading it, in order to figure out if I should read the entire article, start with the title. If the title catches my eye, then I would read the conclusion. Well, no, title into the abstract, sorry. So start with the title, go into the abstract, skim through the abstract in terms of a summary of the work. If I'm still interested and I want to know a bit more, I would go in and read the conclusion as the next step to see the full detailed conclusion that the author has made. And then after that, I go back to the introduction and start at the beginning of the paper and work its way through. Yeah, so that's the way I do it, and it tends to be the way a lot of people have done it as well. I know through the young water professionals that came through quite strongly in terms of how you go about reading a paper. I will say, thanks to some of the generative AI and that going on, most people don't go that route, and they would go and use elicit or something to summarize the paper for them. I have a tendency not to trust technology when it comes to that. I would still go the old school route of starting with the title into the abstract, jump into the conclusion, and then going back into the introduction and working my way through. So that's a little bit around the publication process, the different sections in a full paper. But again, because we are focusing on the abstracts here, you might not go through a full paper process to produce your abstract. I wouldn't recommend it, but that tends to be what happens. So when you start writing, start with a skeleton outline. If you haven't produced a skeleton outline, please produce your skeleton outline before you do your abstract. Don't start with the abstract, start with a skeleton outline. So after you've determined your vision, why you want to publish, who is your target audience, you then need to start writing. As we've always said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but a paper begins with a skeleton outline, after which you are going to add some meat to the bones. And eventually you'll go and put some clothes and makeup on it in order to have a final manuscript. But it starts with the bones. You wouldn't start with your, at the beginning and write in full sentences. Start with keywords, bullet points. And again, if you have a supervisor, please don't give the supervisor full sentences that they need to review in the beginning stages of your paper writing process. Give them bullet points, give them an outline that makes it easier for them to read, understand, and critique. A lot of people waste a lot of time and energy by writing in full sentences from the very beginning, which makes it that much harder to actually go about reviewing and editing. So, beginning with your skeleton outline, and again, this is in bullet point form, clearly answer the following. What is the central message of your paper? What are the key points? What are the key outcomes? Those are kind of the three main elements when it comes to that skeleton outline. Your central message, your key points, and your key outcomes / results. So, write it in bullet point form, as I said, and it must clearly state what are the central messages, your key points, your key outcomes. And we then move on to the central message. And again, spend a lot of time on this as it will pay off in the long run. So develop a central message of your manuscript. You can use between 20 and 25 words. Define the materials and methods that you used to carry out your study, or describe your intervention. And then summarize the questions and the problems. So the central message should be, what is the question that your paper is addressing? Why is the work important? Can you explain it for a non-expert what the work is all about? And this is quite important for us as SAAIR, as we have very different backgrounds and disciplines, and the work that we do is quite varied. You would need to explain your work so that somebody who works in quality assurance is able to understand what an institutional researcher does. And the same way, a institutional researcher or a HEMAS officer needs to be able to understand what is done in quality assurance. So describe for your friend that is not an expert in the field what you are doing. If you have children, you could also try and explain to children what it is that you're trying to do, what is the central message. And if a child can understand it, then somebody with a PhD should be able to understand it as well. So really try and keep it short and concise. Do a central message of your paper within 20 to 25 words. And as I said, spend time on this because it will pay off in the long run. What we find when it comes to reviewing abstracts and that is that there isn't this clarity of thought up front. It tends to emerge as people go through their research process. and their paper writing process, but really you need to start with this up front. So you could write down the 3 central points of your paper. Try and summarize your paper in one sentence, one short sentence. Describe your work to a colleague in 1 minute. You could also do those elevator pitches that they talk about quite a lot. And importantly, why was the work done? Why is it important? Why should we actually care about it? So that is a really good exercise for you to do. Write down 3 central points of your paper. A paper shouldn't really have more than 3 central points. Otherwise, it will be difficult for the reader to be able to follow, and it would be difficult for you to put a story together around it. You should be able to summarize it in one sentence. You should be able to describe your work to a colleague in 1 minute or less, and you should know why was the work done. You also need to think about the contributions of your work. So here we're talking about something a little bit longer, and being able to summarize in less than half a page your contribution in terms of what was known before you started the work. And again, that's where your literature review kind of comes in to assist you, and the point of a literature review. What are the key points of your contributions? Defining the materials and the methods used, describing the intervention. Are the results what you are expected, or are there any surprises? In science, surprises are a good thing. When we get to go, Eureka. Um, so if there are surprises, that's good. Don't be afraid or cautious if you find a lot of surprises in your work. You should be able to do conclusions of your work so far. What are the lessons learned? And then any unanswered questions that you might have. So can you see we're starting to put together something now that would be quite useful in terms of being able to write an abstract from it. If you're starting off writing an abstract, you wouldn't have any sense of structure or coherence around it. But if you're able to do your skeleton outline, that includes the central message of your work, as well as the contributions of your work, you would probably be able to generate a okayish abstract if you haven't gone through the full paper writing process. So we've got a little bit of an activity over here. This was what we would do with the people in an actual workshop setting. But I want you to focus on point number 2. Try and summarize your paper in 1 sentence. And I want you to type that in the chat for me, please. If you can start typing in the chat, trying to summarize your paper in 1 sentence. And it shouldn't be a run-on sentence as well. That takes up a whole paragraph. 1 sentence, please. Is anybody brave enough to put it in their chat? Let me put one in the chat that I'm busy with as well. Okay, I've gone and put in mine in the chat. Thanks, Tatu. You've gone and put yours in the chat as well. This is hard. There's a lovely Mark Twain quote saying, apologies for the long letter. I didn't have time to summarize. It takes a lot of work to be able to summarize your work and put it into one sentence. A lot of clarity and thought. Those are good. Thank you, Ayanda. Monitoring foundation provisioning and the performance impact to the relevant mainstream degree. Very interesting, very necessary. Tatu's is around graduate employability and AI in the new workplace. Good to know what we're preparing our students for. Pedagogical adaptability and the application of a taxonomy of cognitive categories as a teaching, learning, and assessment tool. Thank you, Celia. Uh, it would be nice if you try to explain that to a non-expert and figured out what simpler language could be used to still convey the main point across. Yeah, it's there. Determine factors of effective decision making for middle level management. These are good ones. These are all really good abstracts that I hope you would submit for the conference. And they actually seem to be really interesting. So well done on being able to summarize it into one sentence. As I said, it is not easy to do. It takes a lot of time, effort, and clarity of thought to be able to summarize your work into something that is short, sweet, and concise. So hopefully from this, you would be able to start developing your outline paper. And from that, you would do your abstracts. Great. We got some good ones coming through now. Good job to everybody on this. And again, you would take those sentences and revise, revise, and revise. So for the SAAIR conference, we've got a deadline of the 30th of April, which is just around the corner. What you need to include is your abstract. You need to include at least 3 to 5 keywords, a conclusion, at most 150 words of their proposed contribution. You need and email this to truesair@tut.ac.za. You would also need to indicate whether you're wanting to do a paper presentation or a poster presentation. Okay. So keeping this in mind, we have to produce an abstract, we have to do keywords, we have to have our conclusion, and we need to have that title in there. Let's talk a little bit around what is the point of your title. You would have seen in the order of when we write, you start with your title, and you can also end with the title after you've revised it. So for the title, keep it as short as possible, but it should still be informative. As I said, it sells the manuscript. It also gets people to attend your presentation. So you need to have an interesting title where people would go about and actually want to attend your session when you present it at a conference. Express only one idea or subject in the title. Again, that clarity of thought, and the sentences that you've been producing are helping you put together a title. Importantly, is your important words are placed first. So the emphasis is on the front part of your title. And that is, so if you're doing if the importance is higher education, then higher education goes in front. If it's the institutional research, the emphasis needs to be on the first few words in your title. So there is a structure that you should be following in terms of putting your title together. Put those important words first. Avoid abbreviations in your title. And that applies to your abstract as well. Avoid abbreviations when you're putting it together. And that title should really make the reader interested in continuing reading. or make that delegate want to attend your presentation. They shouldn't have to go and read the abstract in order to decide whether or not they want to do it. Typically, they would have made a decision based on the title alone, whether they're going to attend it. And then they would, if they're good delegates, they would go and read the abstract just before the session starts. So the title is really, really important. You can use subtitles. If you needed to explain things a little bit more, it can be useful. You can also use your hyphen or your colons in terms of breaking up that title. So ideally, you would want to test a number of titles together. And here I think ChatGPT is actually quite useful in terms of coming up with catchy suggestions for your titles that you could then start to use and adapt in terms of putting your title together. So spend a lot of time focusing on the title, get it right, get it clear, and get it catchy. Here's a lovely example, and this came from Gustav Olsen. So why do you want to have as your title the effect of heating the albumin and vitellis of the Gallus dometicus contained in a calcium carbonate shell in H2O to 373.15 degrees Fahrenheit? No, that's Kelvin, sorry. When boiling a chicken egg in water actually says it all. Okay. So don't try and be too smart in your title as well. It doesn't need to be academic. It's the purpose of the title is to try and sell your work and to get people to actually attend your presentation session as well. Here are some comparative titles that all kind of explain the same thing. So the first title is The Use of Generative Artificial Intelligence in Institutional Research / Effectiveness. The second one is A Practical Guide for Generative AI Use in Research. These are actually real titles. The third one as one, Generative AI in Research, Perspectives and Cultural Norms. The fourth one, Generative AI in Institutional Research, My Perspectives and Experience, and then ChatGPT, Fad or Future. If you could put in the chat, which ones do you prefer? And again, I will say the title of a manuscript is different to the title of a conference presentation and should be different as well. And in the same way, your PhD title should be different to the journal article and the presentation topic. So which title here would you actually want to go and attend the session of? You can just put in the chat 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Rilla, I need to go back to you around your comments in terms of abbreviations. Yeah. Even in the abstracts, I would write out the departments of higher education and training. If you're going to be using it at least once in the abstract, write it out full. And you could then put in the abbreviation afterwards and use the abbreviation afterwards elsewhere in your abstract. But only if you have limitations on space. It is a bit of an assumption to know that everybody knows who DHET and CHE are. And you would want to avoid assumptions around that because you could have somebody internationally come in. So even although we know who DHET and CHE are, I would still write them out in the abstract. Okay, so a bit of responses on number 5. Yeah, the number 5 one is the one I wrote. It's catchy. Probably not that correct. A good title, I would say, would be number 1, because it's giving you the generative artificial intelligence. It's around the use of it. So the focus is on the use You can see they put the use up front, and then institutional research / effectiveness, the aspects of IR that we're interested in. Can you see number 2 as well? A practical guide. The emphasis is on the practical guide of AI in research. That one, you don't really know what research it is. Is it institutional research? Is it academic research? Is it research related to water? Not that clear. The third one, again, they've gone and put the generative AI in research as the focus of it. And then about their perspectives and cultural norms. Cultural norms is a bit of a iffy and confusing element to be bringing into it in terms of clarity. 4.1, number 4, I added that one as well. Again, emphasis is on the generative AI in institutional research. Is my perspectives and experience something that people would actually be interested in attending? If I'm somebody with who's new to the field, with less than 5 years experience, it might not be that interesting. But if it's somebody who's got 30 years of experience in the field, talking about it, that might make it more interesting for people to attend. And again, the fifth one, as I said, yeah, fad or future. I mean, that is kitsch when it comes to a topic. And unfortunately, it seems to be the most popular one. But maybe a better one there could have been generative AI. But then again, not everybody knows ChatGPT is generative AI. So, and fad or future. Another tip is you can use questions in your titles. You put a question in your title and then you answer it in your presentation or your abstract. And maybe that's also what some of you are moving towards with that number 5. It's a question, and you know exactly that the presentation is going to be answering that question for you. Something that I also don't, and the other aspect that is pulling in there is that it's a fairly controversial question. Typically, if you want to add an element of controversy into it, people would then come and attend your session as well, or want to read your paper. So the fad or future is also a question, but it's also fairly controversial. And so those are the hooks that I've put into that title over there to get people to actually want to come and present it. However, if it was a journal article and the journal article was ChatGPT fad or future, I wouldn't want to read it because it's lacking that scientific and scholarly approach. It seems to be very much a popular opinion article. Okay, so that was a good exercise around titles. When it comes to keywords, keywords are important. You're going to have to do keywords. These keywords should be descriptive. Be precise. So avoid keywords like higher education, which is quite broad. You might want to keep in the quality assurance in there. Although if you're doing something around the institutional audits, maybe that would be a better one to bring in there, or something around the standards. Those would be better keywords than plain quality assurance. And in the same way that institutional research itself is quite a broad statement, and it means different things to different people, you might want to bring in some other additional elements of the institutional research, such as like effectiveness, efficiency, surveys. Yeah. And this is typically used to search for your papers. In the conference itself, these keywords are typically also used, as well as the themes that you're submitting it under, to structure the program together. So having good keywords helps you land up being in the right session in a conference, and it helps the conference organizer put together that structure quite nicely based on the title and the keywords that you have and the themes that you identified. The person putting the program together shouldn't have to go through your abstract to figure out what your presentation is about and which session it should fall under. So put in good keywords that make it useful for the conference organizer to put together a program, and making sure that your session is in, that your presentation is in the correct session as well. If you land up being in a session that isn't relevant to your work, chances are you had a confusing title, the keywords weren't correct. And as I said, the conference chair shouldn't have to go through reading your abstract in order to figure out what your work is about. That should come through from the title and from the keywords. So the abstract, we've gone through it, the different elements already. So I think I just have one slide on this. The abstract should be informative, and it should stand alone, and it needs to cover the content of the work that you've done. So it should be a combination of the problems and the conclusions. And that's why it gets written after you've done your work, because you would know your problem and you would know what your conclusions are. So for SAAIR, in the abstract, you need to include your objectives of your work, your methodology. And again, if you're going for the practitioner base, you would be describing your intervention a little bit there. What are the key findings and what are the key recommendations? Those are the elements that we look for in the abstract for SAAIR. It's always good to read what other conferences require, because each conference is unique in terms of the requirements for the abstracts. Okay. Abstracts, again, they're the selling points for search machines. So you need to be brief and specific. For a paper, an academic paper, typically your abstract should be less than 200 words with no references and no figures. For SAAIR, we want in less than 400 words. So that is a fair amount. It's still less than 1 page, but it is a fair amount for you to put in a lot of information so that your evaluators are able to evaluate your abstract appropriately to decide if it should be in the conference program or not. So for SAAIR, it should be less than 400 words. And we also ask for the conclusion as well, which should be less than 150 words. So how would we actually go about evaluating the proposals? The evaluators, it is a blind review process that's done. We do have a cohort of reviewers that we use. I will say a lot of the reviewers do tend to be fairly academic rather than practitioner. So just, yeah, it is something that we try to deal with. So when we look at the proposals, they need to be linked to the SAAIR objectives. And this is namely to benefit, assist, and advance institutional research, leading to improved understanding, planning, and operation of institutions of higher education. Institutional research at SAAIR is the broad definition of institutional researchers. It is not just the scope of institutional researchers. HEMIS is there, quality assurance is there, it's all in there. Everybody who belongs to SAAIR falls under that umbrella of institutional research. Quality assurance, it's all there. So please, when we talk institutional research at SAAIR, we're using the very, very broad definition of it. The second thing we look at is whether the proposal links to the conference themes. And that's why we have Michael here as well to speak a little bit around what the conference themes are so that you're able to package your work to sit under the conference themes. If it does not directly address a conference sub-theme or theme, then it can be still considered for SAAIR, but that clear focus to the SAAIR objectives needs to be there. We look at the clarity of the proposal, the quality of the writing, the organization of the ideas, the clarity of the assumptions that are made, and the logic of the arguments. So that clarity of thought that comes through after you've done a skeleton outline and put it together into an abstract is important. As a reviewer, you can really pick up when somebody has started writing with the first sentence of the abstract and taken it through, and they don't have that clarity of thought that is needed around what is the central message, what are the key objectives, what are the takeaways, what is the contribution of the work. Other things we look at is around the importance, significance, and relevance of the topic, and major issues addressed for institutional research, and then the potential significance of the contribution. That is important. You need to be explicit around what is the contribution of it. There've been a couple of abstracts where I have reviewed it and said this is not a well-written abstract. However, the contribution it is making is important. So the contribution is important when it comes to the evaluation criteria that we use. And that is how your papers get evaluated. Specific ones around the contributed papers, again, there we would need the title, authors, contact information of the lead author. The abstracts, again, need to include your objectives, your methodology, findings, key recommendations. We look at the appropriateness of the theoretical or conceptual frameworks that you've used. How sound is the research design? And that's important as well when it comes to a lot of the work that we do around surveys. The research design around how the surveys are structured, who is it administered to? What is the appropriateness of the data sources or evidence used? Again, important for surveys. Clarity of the exposition of ideas, analysis, arguments, and conclusions. Clarity coming through. And please, evidence that the research is near completion and that the paper will be completed by the time of the conference. So you do have to have preliminary results coming in there. You can't just say the results will be presented at the conference. You need to have done some kind of analysis of your work already. Specific criteria when it comes to posters or rapid presentations. Michael, I hope will talk a little bit more around this. The appropriateness of the content that would go into the poster. For the rapid presentations, we're looking for those story-like, short, flowing presentations of no more than 10 slides and 10 minutes in duration. We're looking for something that would be image-rich with very little text. So this is, again, we're trying something new in terms of the rapid presentations to allow more people to present at the conference and to present their work. And even here, we're looking for a clarity in terms of the exposition of ideas, analysis, arguments, and conclusions. So I hope you're starting to see that that clarity comes through quite strongly. And again, to say that the clarity can only come once you've done an outline of your paper and once you have put the thought into it, revised it, and revised it. Clarity of ideas doesn't come when you start writing with the first sentence. It comes after a lot of work and a lot of revision. So this is again from the work that we've done with the young water professionals. What do editors and reviewers look for in papers? They look for relevance for the journal. So is a part of the journal scope and the objectives of the journal. In the same way for SAAIR, is a part of the SAAIR objectives and the aims. Is it relevant to the conference themes? Originality. So what's new about the subject, treatment, or results? Are you presenting the same thing that you presented last year? And we're becoming better at picking up where people are presenting the same thing year on year on year without presenting anything new. Or is it the same that somebody else has presented and the author hasn't actually referenced the other work that has taken place in that space? And they're just presenting theirs as separate or standalone. Okay. So originality is important. We want original research coming through. Clarity. Clarity and the quality of the writing. So does it communicate it well? Does it tell a good story? Are the conclusions valid and objective? That objective is important. I reviewed a lot of articles in terms of the institutional audits, and the objectiveness was not there. So please, you need to be objective in your conclusions. Try and remove your personal grudges against the process. In science, we are objective. And then, is it a good short title with keywords, and is the abstract covering everything in the article, and does it stand alone? Some of the red flags for you to keep in mind: spelling and grammar mistakes. And again, we know a lot of our people might be second language English and they write in, but unfortunately, if you've got speller and grammar mistakes, so this generally shows that there could be other mistakes in the research design. So as a reviewer, when you read something that's got spelling or grammar mistakes, it then alerts you to the possibility of other mistakes and bigger mistakes. So you actually start to review the paper quite differently, become a lot more critical of it. Because if the person has made a mistake in spelling or grammar, they could have made other bigger mistakes. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the way things work and the way reviewers work and the way people's brains work when it comes to picking up errors. Once you find one mistake, you tend to assume that there are going to be a lot more. So go through yours, make sure that you don't have spelling and grammar mistakes, because it does change how the reviewer looks at your paper and your abstract. And again, a poorly structured abstract can mean poorly structured research. We infer a lot from what goes into the abstracts and how it's structured in order to make assumptions around what the presentation is likely to be like, or what the full paper is likely to be like. Where there isn't that central message and you read in this abstract and you go, what the hell is this person talking about? I can't follow what their point is. Yeah. Make it easier for the reviewers. It shouldn't be a treasure hunt where they have to go and find your treasure, which is hidden and buried under the text. Even as lecturers, when it came to marking, at times we would have to go on a treasure hunt to try and give the students marks. Don't make it like that. Make it easier for the reviewer. Make a clear central message. Be clear around what the contribution your work is making to the field. They shouldn't have to go and infer around what the possible contribution of the paper is. You need to know that. And where there aren't any results, it's another red flag because it means a work in progress. And you're then taking the risk that the person could stand up and present at the conference without results, or with results that haven't actually been analyzed properly and digested properly. So that is the risk you make when you don't have preliminary results coming through. For those of us who are putting together a good conference program, it's important that we ensure we've got the best presentations, the best contributions, the best clear a program together so that people actually want to come to the conference. The last thing we want to have is a conference where people say, oh, that presentation wasn't very good. I don't know how it got accepted. And then they stop coming to the conferences because they assume that the quality has dropped. So the reviewing of the abstracts is a really crucial and important process to ensure the actual quality of the conference itself, as well as the long-term sustainability of the conference, so that people continue to come to our conferences because of the high quality presentations that take place. So I have run out of time. I did have some additional slides in here around the authors. I do just want to say This might be an issue where you're sitting more in the academic environment, or you have supervisors who are dictating authorship of your papers. But typically, if you're the lead author, you're the manager of the entire paper writing process. You're doing most of the work. You're assuming the main responsibility for the paper, including the work that the paper is based on, and you're taking main responsibility of the writing. You're also project managing the whole experience, the whole paper writing process, and making sure that people are sticking to the deadlines, your co-authors that you give. You would also handle the review process with the journal editor. So the lead author, I think, is quite clear in terms of the role. Co-authors, this is where it starts to get a little bit blurry, but they typically are the people who are participating in the work that you do. They're contributing ideas, not just data. If it's somebody who's contributing just data, you might want to include them in the acknowledgements. But for the co-author, they are contributing intellectually to the work. So they contribute during the paper writing phase, and typically they would be responsible for writing sections of the paper themselves. If there's a reviewer, editor's comment around a section of their paper, they would be the ones who would be expected to respond to it. They, co-authors, are responsible for the full paper and not just their section. And they should be able to present and answer questions on the full paper. So this is important to keep in mind when it comes to including co-authors for the conference. If they're a good co-author, they should be able to answer all questions related to the presentation and not just on the chapter that they wrote. Supervisors. So here becomes a little bit blurry. Generally, the supervisor's role is to provide ideas and give constructive feedback during the whole research process, and not just the paper writing phase. They might not necessarily write sections of the paper, but they would guide the students in terms of what to write and actively influences the content. And important, the contribution from the supervisor must be significant to meet the requirements of a co-author. If they haven't contributed, they shouldn't be a co-author. When it comes to the order of the authors, and sorry for the spelling error over there, there is no universal standard. Discuss with the authors and the co-authors and your supervisors. Discuss with them at the start of the paper writing process, and be open about issues of co-authors and contributions and what is expected to somebody if they are co-author on your presentation. Typically, what we would suggest is that the lead author goes first, and thereafter the authors can be listed in either decreasing contribution or in alphabetical order based on their surname. As I said, there is no universal standard. Biology uses a different approach. Mathematics uses a very different approach as well. But typically for us, the lead author comes first, and then you can either list them in decreasing contribution or in the alphabetical order. I would probably go for the decreasing contribution. And in that aspect, you might have your supervisor as last, depending on the contribution that they've made. Last slide for me. So how would you go about using AI in the work that you do? Scholarly is quite a good AI tool when it comes to finding articles. I hope all of you know that you can't use ChatGPT to do a literature search because it doesn't have the most recent information. If you're wanting more recent information, you need to use a better tool, and one which is dedicated to literature reviews, such as Scholarly. Elicit, I'm starting to play around with. It helps you analyze articles and identify the articles that you would then go and read properly. Make sure you still read your articles. Don't use a tool to summarize it for you and then you don't go on and read it. It is a tool. Okay. Do not use ChatGPT or Copilot to write your abstract for you, you tend to pick it up in the writing, and it tends not to do a very good job of it. You can use Grammarly or Word to improve your English, but again, just keep in mind that they might use some of the American English in it, and they tend to go with a more informal writing tone. So just keep that in mind. When we write, we still writing professionally, and we still are fairly formal, but we are concise and clear. So those are the things to just keep in mind. As I say, you can use generative AI for catchy titles, but avoid going the kitsch route. Yeah, we still want some semblance of quality when it comes to the titles in the program. And then what I would really recommend you use is that you start using it as a tool and you start playing around with the prompts. So you put in your abstract and you ask it to say, what is the central message of your abstract? Is it the same central message that you wrote? If it's not, you need to go and revise your abstract because it isn't clear in terms of what the central message is. And in the same way, once you've got your abstract, ask it to come up with the key points. Are they the same key points that you came up with? If they're not, you need to revise your abstract so that it is clearer that the points that you want coming through are the points that come out to the reader. You could also ask it to summarize your abstract. In my experience, it doesn't do that good a job in terms of summarizing. It tends to leave out key elements, but it can be a good tool if you're sitting at around 410 words and you've got to get down to 400 words. And you could also start to play around with it in terms of getting it to rewrite sections for you. And then you don't just go and copy and paste, you would go in and edit and improve around it. It is still a bit of a murky area. A lot of the journal articles now are also pushing you to start crediting where you're using AI, how much of it have you used, and that could be something that comes through at a later date. But please use it as a tool. It is available, and it can help you provide an abstract which is clearer and conciser, which would make it easier for the reviewers. Don't use it to go and rewrite your abstract. Okay, I think this is a good point to just hand over to Michael to present a little bit around what is our conference themes and sub-themes, and then we can go into a Q&A session afterwards. Alternatively, you can put your Q&A in the chat and I'll respond. Thanks, Michael. If I can hand it over to you. We're not hearing you.
Hello?
Yes,
Testing
we
one.
can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Ashton. That was amazing. I should have attended one of your courses long ago, man. It was quite comprehensive. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Gordon. I'm the conference chair for the SAAIR annual conference this year. We are hosting it in Pretoria from 5 to 8 November, starting on Tuesday, ending early morning the Saturday. Let's put it like that. This year we decided to do a bit of a disruption from the status quo, because we realized we do want to inspire as well new people to write, and many times they can't come in with a paper for the conference, but they can come in with a poster. So I would like to start with a poster concept. Can I share screen? Let me just see if it will work. There we go. I hope it is highlighted.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. I had trouble with Zoom this morning. and it was not allowing me access to the app, so I had to go online. So I'm going to start with the poster presentation. We got this from Colin Purrington, just so that we can have a general idea to post to people, because there are many concepts that can be taken, but we would like to have people present with the structure, so they get into the thinking of structure for a paper, because the poster presentation guys also needs to submit an abstract, so we have an idea what they're going to present. But here they need not uh, have a full paper. This is rapid, no more than 10 minutes. Very rapid, allowing the audience to interact as well. So there's a 10-minute presentation and a 10-minute interaction with the audience. And the basic layout, if you have a portrait layout, is to have your title clear. Okay. Then the author and your affiliation. No fuzzy things, no distractions throughout the poster. So you want the attention on the poster itself. Okay, this evaluation that came through. Please take note of the evaluation. Right, so the structure would be results focused. So center part, very much results focused. So that takes the biggest part of your presentation, with the introduction and your conclusion on the sides. And picture rich, as you can see, 3 sentences max for the introduction. So it's not very text rich, because the person will need to talk to it. But it can be graphic rich, but also not overwhelmed by graphics. So if you see this yellow part, if you have just 1 or 2 simple graphics, viewers will be drawn to explore them. If you have too many, they are too complicated, they will be repelled. You must be very careful how you present your ideas, your concepts, your poster, and which imagery to use, graphs to use, and so forth. This is the portrait format, and then literature cited, acknowledgements, and then for further information, add your, I almost want to say Twitter, because it's not Twitter anymore, it's X, your LinkedIn, your X, or other platforms that where further information can be gained. Let me just try and move across. Now for the landscape view, and these would normally be for the rapid presentation. So we have posters and rapid presentations. The posters will be a physical poster that's put up on a board. As you can imagine, there are some limitations to that. The visuals need to be very clear. But your rapid presentations is a landscape format that can be presented, and that would, as Ashen mentioned earlier, a maximum of 10 slides, and you would have a maximum of 1 minute per slide if you use 10 slides. 5 slides, 2 minutes per slide. The layout, you can also use your slides as a poster. So then you'll have one slide that speaks to it all, or you can have slides that speak to each of these components, which will end up to 5 or 6 slides, essentially. Please go through the call for papers if you want more information on that. Then we just reduce the size. I'm taking you through as you can see, the call for papers, so that you know where to look for it anyways. Conference theme. Conference theme is a transformed, reimagined university experience, and it goes through the acrostic TRUE. We like wordplay, so therefore we went for that theme, but we also would like people to speak to some of the issues that came out in the previous conference and even in the conference before. So 2022 and 2023, there were some questions that came out that weren't really answered or addressed regarding the issues of university transformation, and not just having university as the status quo that we have today, but what would be what would we see a reimagined university look like, and what would that experience be like, especially post COVID, and especially with the introduction of all the technology we have today. Are we a true 4IR friendly uh, sector as a higher education sector? Is it that we are stuck in the past, or have we come to a place where we are comfortable with the way higher education is, and we can't really shift our minds to what reimagined would be? But I've spoken to many people who have explored a reimagined university before. So we are inviting those people, especially, to start speaking to that, doing their research in this. I just want to take from this paragraph here. So we are building on discussions and presentations of the previous conference, as I mentioned, and we would like to get people to speak about a redefinition of university in the modern era, and we've had talks about that in the previous conference. Forecasting the trajectory of higher education, especially in sight of how we align strategically, how we inform strategic alignment as well. Just speedily carry on. Stream one would be under optimizing the university efficiency and effectiveness. Now, our very first SAAIR annual conference was focused around the idea of effectiveness and quality, but not necessarily efficiency. There was a big question that came up last year. The paradox that we're sitting with, efficiency and effectiveness. How do we navigate that in our education spectrum? So that from there we looked at values chain, ethics, policy implications. So as you can see, it's wide enough for someone to explore. Analyzing the holistic system, from the sector to the university itself. And then one of the key conversations after sessions was around this that I just highlighted: university preparedness for the type of student that's entering the university. Not just the idea of the student being prepared for university, but is the university prepared for the student? And stream two, transformed and reimagined inclusiveness. I think inclusiveness, uh, transformation, and reimagined universities are significant buzzwords in their own right. Now we've jammed them all together, and that really broadens the spectrum of what someone could write about. The endeavor to a favorable higher education experience for all. It's not just for students, but also for the staff at universities. If you would remember, uh, in 2006, 15 and 16, right alongside or towards the end of the Fees Must Fall movement, there was this whole thing about service staff being uh, adopted at universities as full-time staff and no longer being contracted through a third party. So that changed the university experience for service staff. So we is looking at what is being done in higher education in the transformation uh, for more than just the students or for more than just the staff, but more holistically as well. Then we're looking at transformation in the curriculum, the mode of delivery, especially nowadays, the kind of practices, and not just in teaching and learning, but as I said, it's now looking at staffing as well, work practices, and so forth. Infrastructure. At TUT, we have had quite a significant uh, brochure almost of infrastructure uh, issues. We can write a magazine on it. And infrastructure, how is that contributing to the academic experience or the academic program? And in fact, inclusiveness in itself. In this section, I remember colleagues were talking about disabilities, how that is talked about and how it's catered for. Do we see a difference in the the theoretical preparedness against the practical preparedness? Research, innovation, and technologies, how transformation in that is transforming the university, or how the university is impacting on the transformation of research, innovation, and technologies. Community engagement element itself, um, especially how DED views it and how the university views it. How is that considered as contribution? That's just one of the issues there. Then traditional higher university education versus the new era of the university. You would see a couple of papers that's come out in the last 2-3 years about this concept. I've found some in 2014, 2015, and 2016 as well around this topic. So it's been spoken of for a while, before COVID even. And then some of my colleagues felt strongly that we consider the mental health and well-being element. So this might seem like it doesn't fall under the transformed and reimagined agenda as much, but it is really, I think, a strong element of how society has transformed with awareness of mental health. Digital transformation on and online education, that speaks for itself. And third stream, the third stream as the impact of AI and initiatives on higher education and the following issues there. Here we were very careful to not make this conference about AI, and therefore trying to tuck AI sort of under a particular stream, although we can't really run away from it anywhere anymore. It's everywhere. I saw a recent update on WhatsApp that now has an AI component built in there at your fingertips. The apps are everywhere, so we can't really escape from it. Then, so here, under the impact of AI initiatives, we're looking at teaching and learning and the assessment in the blended system. We'd love to explore, especially this component. This has been a great challenge for many. The challenges and innovations in delivering quality education and capacitating staff to do so. And the last, just the post-COVID conferences spoke a lot about staff, capacitating staff, and that was so interesting. We can look at what's looking like now. What if we went into a similar situation as we did in 2020 this year or next year or in the near future. Digital literacy among students and faculty, that's also a very big issue, and so forth. As you can see, we have looked at a wide spectrum. So it'll be very difficult to not fit your research under any of these themes. But what might be difficult is to align it with one particular stream. And this is what I want to urge, is that we do look at a particular stream under which it would be best aligned, and then submit according to that. Ashton, that is it for now.
Great. Thanks very much. So we've got some time for questions or comments. Now's the time to be asking them.
Nothing.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions or comments. Yes, Takalani's got her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this session. I think it was very useful. And I wish it had also been done a little bit earlier. My question is just around about whether the deadline might possibly extend it for submitting abstracts, or if you are seeing the 30th as final. But I think so many people are going to benefit from the recording if we are sharing the recording, maybe in the newsletter or on the social media platforms and just sending it out to colleagues on the database. This was a really, really good session. Thank you.
I can answer that with a resounding yes. We built in the extension to this, so there will be a second phase, and we will announce that by next week.
So if I can make a recommendation, is that as a delegate, you would still aim for the first deadline, because it then gives you opportunity to revise your abstract. So use the opportunity to revise your abstract, not to delay writing it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's perfect, Ashton. Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm. And I will also add, I mean, as Michael said as well, yeah, I mean, AI is important. And I think at last year's conference, there were a couple of sessions where people were just kind of experimenting with AI. We would like to see a more scholarly approach being used in this conference if you do have AI. And it's really around the application of it. Using the AI. I think we're now at the point where everybody knows what AI is. So if you are planning on doing something around the AI, go back and have a look at the conference themes. And yeah, make sure it fits. I mean, we might still consider something if it is an exploratory approach, but we would then have to look at what is a possible contribution of it. So the AI is a tough one, yeah, for the program committee to be having a look at. But as I say, we've had space in previous conferences for it. So we would like to see, even if you are experimenting, that it is a scholarly approach that you're taking to it and not just playing around. Yes, Ramanda.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Well, if there are no further comments or questions, I just want to thank very much everybody for attending. thank you very much, Michael, for presenting. Yes, we have recorded this, so we will make it available to everybody. I have put the slides in the chat. Yeah, and one of the things is if you really want to become a good academic writer, then you need to read a lot of articles and you need to start reviewing articles and abstracts as well. They do work hand in hand. So you would have seen from the link in the chat, from SAAIR's side, we are busy putting in place possible courses, publication courses around improving the academic writing of SAAIR and building up the scholarship as a means of trying to fund our journal moving forward. So if you are interested in these courses around writing, academic writing, we are planning on doing 2 this year. The one would be for those who've got a completed paper already and just need to go through the final stages of getting it into a more publishable format. And then the second one, which would be a more detailed one, and would take you basically through the entire process of putting together a paper and landing up with something that would have a higher probability of being accepted in a journal or in a conference. As I say, we're busy structuring those, and unfortunately, work got a little bit hectic. So those courses haven't happened yet, but we are planning for them to happen. So hopefully you are interested. If you are interested, you can put in your contact details in the evaluation form and we'll be in touch with you. But we really think it is a significant contribution to be able to get our own SAAIR journal and improve the capacity of our members to be able to publish. We as a sector will benefit from that. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope to see everybody submitting abstracts for the conference. Good quality abstracts. Even although it's a blind review process, I'm hoping that clarity that we've spoken about will come through quite strongly in the abstracts from the people who've attended this webinar. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Aston and Michael. Bye-bye. Bye, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.